Everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar, Integrating Voice to Improve Regulatory Surveillance in Your Organization. Today's webinar will be presented by Mauricio Renzi from RedOwl, who is the Director of Sales Engineering. Mauricio has extensive experience deploying regulatory surveillance products for various banks and customers globally. Phil Diffie from Verint is the Head of Global Sales for Financial Compliance and runs the business development function for Verint for their financial compliance practice. With that, let's get started. Phil, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be based. I wanted to talk to you about why we would want to monitor voice. Voice has been a primary method of communication within both the financial services industry, enterprise organizations, contact centers for many years now. And many companies record voice because of risk. Some companies record because they are regulated to, and some don't record at all where they have no perceived use of the solution. However, certainly within the financial services environment, it's very likely to be mandated with the latest regulations that are being forced on organizations, the like of Dodd-Frank, MiFID, and soon to be MiFID II. In these particular cases, voice recording is there to meet both a risk and a compliance requirement, and there to help them prove that they are providing best practice to third parties, they're not carrying out market manipulation, and are ensuring that there is a safe and fair financial services environment. Voice communications are completely unstructured. They're very complex in their nature, and over the years, with the voice recording that has been captured, they're often not the best quality, but they are very revealing in the content that they capture. Why should we look at voice as part of an analytics program? Well, once an investigation has been started, or once a business wishes to look at their own internal processes, it's really difficult to analyze voice when you may have many millions of calls over years of operation. And the only way that we've seen people successfully do this is to hire, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands, of analysts to assist with analyzing each individual voice call. Automation would save a huge amount of money and also make this a much simpler process. And certainly with the methods of automation that are available now, it would fit within current standard processes that other parts of the business already use. So at the moment, how are retrospective investigations carried out now? Typically, they're triggered by the compliance. They may be triggered by HR or simply finance within an organization. But worst case, they could be triggered externally by a regulator. Very large volumes of data need to be reviewed and provided. We've seen cases where millions of calls have had to be handed over to the regulator. Commonly, the assumption is there's no way of understanding what is contained within that. However, once you start looking at that data, you then really need to analyze that within context of other modes of communication, such as eComms. Even the regulator will have exactly the same problem providing that analysis of the data, and inherently they've been sampling what they think is the most likely cause of an inherent problem. They will look at specific lexicon of words that they may find. They also may target particular individuals or desks, but they have very little way of accurately analyzing all of the data in context. For the business itself, it's very difficult to understand the risk of the data contained in that. Once the data is handed over, they are open to the regulator to review anything, and there literally could be any problems, inherent process issues. There could be the target that they're actually looking for, but there could be a whole host of other things. And whilst they don't want to hide anything, what they should be aware of is what they're exposing within the business. Even when the data is reviewed, it's very difficult to correlate between other time-critical information, such as IM, email, business, door access, video. Linking all of this requires all of that data to be time-critical, synchronized, and it's really difficult to access that information when voice is captured as an individual piece of information. Where are people on proactive surveillance? A lot of businesses are reviewing data from a small random sample perspective. They'll look at maybe 1 or 2% of all calls created by an individual, a team, a desk, or within a swaps environment. It's really difficult for them to analyze anything more than that without hiring lots of people. Quite often it's potluck to find a compliance breach, illegal activity, bigotry within the environment, bullying, information leakage, really, really difficult to find. Some people we've found have had teams for a number of years and they find nothing, but they know it's there, it's just that they can't find it. As I said, it's focusing on certain individuals, people who are coming up through the ranks, being trained, not what we would call an experienced person, so that they may be monitored more than others, but it's not a perfect solution. Targets often become what might be seen as, I think I've got an idea about how we may find something. There may be a rate setting period, so they'll target a time frame slightly before or slightly after that rate setting to see if there's any unusual activity. It could also be just targeting people who are dealing outside of normal working hours, but it is very much random. It's also very difficult when you're using the vendor's own search and replay tools, because that's linked to only that vendor and often not linked to any other mode of communications. And overall, even when you find data, you then have to manually build a case management solution. So having an automated system where you have multiple eComms data and voice in context would make life a lot easier. So I'll hand back now to Maurizio, if you'd like to take over from this point. Do you want me to share with your screen?
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. And Phil, can you just confirm that you see my the next slide in the deck?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Phil. This is Mauricio from RedOwl, and let's talk a little bit about what compliance teams need today to succeed. And we've been working with customers in this space for some time, and we've seen over the last year an interesting evolution in terms of the kinds of requirements that they're facing in this space. And so here's a summary of what we have found in working with our clients. First and foremost, what's needed most in this with this set of problems is a single pane of glass, really a single point from which all surveillance activities can be performed and investigations can be executed, a single platform. The requirement then, of course, bleeds out into having the ability to ingest and analyze data from all sources, starting with voice, but then also including email, chat, trade activities, surveillance alerts, bringing all of this activity really into this single platform. The third point here is providing a ability for an effective and efficient workflow. The compliance analysts, the front office supervisors we work with are very busy, and so what they really need most of all is a platform that makes their jobs easier and that gives them faster access to relevant data and the ability to action that data. And finally, in most of the larger organizations that we work with, these are complex hierarchies, complex distributions of work, and so they need a customizable way to ensure that that different requirements are handled within this one platform. So front office, middle office, back office, all of these folks want to have their own unique perspective on the data and their own unique workflows that suit them best. So that's really what we've come to find are some of the key requirements in this space, and ultimately that's what led us over this past year to forge this relationship with Verint. RedOwl provides a platform that is capable of bringing data together from a variety of sources, analyzing that data, and then presenting a set of really refined, analyzed results to these end users. But over the last 12 months, what we have begun to find is that voice is no longer seen as a nice to have. Our customers have been pushing us and communicating to us that voice is really a critical part of these efforts now. So we've come together with Verint to bring voice into the fold. We've got basically a set of complementary technologies, which I'll show you in a demo in just a moment. But ultimately, we're delivering on that first requirement, which is to provide that single pane of glass that includes instant messaging, email, Bloomberg chat, web browsing, trading alerts, and now voice content, all resolved around those traders, around those monitored employees, to give that single view of a person's activity, their day-to-day behaviors across all of these different channels. Finally, the idea of the efficient workflow. We'll touch on that in the demonstration. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how RedOwl really helps mitigate that insider threat for both information security and primarily regulatory surveillance teams. When we talk about regulatory surveillance, here are some of the other trends that we've seen. I think folks probably on this call are pretty familiar with many of these, but I'd say the number one thing we've heard is that folks want to move towards a smarter review that incorporates all of these different sources of data. So the days of just randomly selecting communications and presenting them in a work queue to an analyst are over. I think our customers feel that they have a requirement to really start to surface the things that are interesting and the things that are relevant, so that they can deliver a higher level of protection. Obviously, complex regulations are increasing the cost of compliance. Where we've seen a lot of struggles with our customers or the fact that unstructured data, of which voice is a key source, are really difficult to review, and so there's a lot of manual effort that goes into it. And ultimately, that's probably why folks resort to random sampling. And data is very siloed. So this has been obviously a major challenge, is bringing all this data together into a single point of analysis. And finally, noise. Noise is something that through analytics we feel there's a great opportunity to reduce the noise that analysts have to deal with. Behavioral analysis, looking at things that look unusual in the data set. And so ultimately the idea there is noise has increased, so we've got to find ways to cut back on that noise. As far as RedOwl is concerned, one of the things that we'll demonstrate shortly is key capabilities. So first of all, seamless review of trades, alerts, communications, all in a single place. So overlay all these different channels on the screen, give the analyst access to everything at the same time. Because we're doing that, because we're applying some analytics, which you'll see, that the goal is to reduce that noise and those false positives, and then deliver this efficient workflow that we've talked about. And finally, visualization in full context. And you will see that in its glory in the user interface in the demo. At a very high level, just to quickly touch on our platform, really think of this as a big data engine. We collect data from lots of sources, communications data, transactional data, enrichment data in terms of organizational data where folks supervisor hierarchies and that sort of thing. We bring it all into a sort of a single analytics layer. So we apply sort of a standard data model to that data, and then apply a set of scoring techniques that extract those things that make those events interesting. You know, is it a weird time of day? Is it an unusual pair of communicators? Are there lexicon hits? So we score all these events to find those features that make those events interesting. And then we apply behavioral analytics over that to say, for this particular person, we're seeing a pattern that looks unusual given their history. So that all happens in the analytics engine. And then we deliver what we call an informed narrative in the user interface to make life easier for that analyst, to allow them to really quickly dig into the things that are important. And just a quick word on analytics, and then we'll jump into a real brief demonstration. But the 4 key points that drive our analytics are the data model. We look at communications at a high level, communications, physical access. We look at transactional data and even digital activity data. So we bring events and we basically map them to that data model. Once we've done that, we have the ability to apply behavioral analytics over those events. So there's a lot of sophisticated data science behind the scenes that helps us profile normal user behavior and spot those anomalies that make particular events interesting. We have sentiment analysis. So because so much what we do is unstructured data, voice, email, chat, we've got to be able to look for communications, the content of which is interesting. So negative sentiment, positive sentiment, lexicons, and finally visualizations. And so for visualizations, let's go ahead and jump into the product. And so very briefly, just want to really focus specifically on the things that we do with voice and how we overlay that with other types of activity. Here you see the RedOwl solution, the single pane of glass. And the idea behind the single pane of glass is to give that compliance analyst the place from which they can pivot from their daily review function, look at alerts, look at events, and then ultimately dig into a forensics deep dive if they need to do an investigation. But let's start with the analytics first and foremost. And so I'm going to run a behavioral report just to give you an idea of the kinds of analysis that we do against data. And from our perspective, you know, the analysis of user behavior comes down to looking at data across all these different modes of activity, building baselines of what's normal for an individual trader or an individual monitored employee, and then giving you this visibility as to when someone's baseline, when someone sort of deviates from that baseline to a significant extent. And what we do is we highlight those deviations. So here I've got a report that's telling me, let's look for unusual transactions. Let's look for events that were flagged, and let's look for voice data that was flagged as well. And we have Ralph Abrams, for instance, and we can see that there's, on this timeline, there's a series of activities that have been marked. And this is the idea here, really, of being able to overlay activity from lots of different channels, whether it's chat, and we can see that he's got some Bloomberg chats, for instance, that have been flagged for a number of reasons. So I talked about scoring. Here are the things that scored on this event: oversight evasion, direct chat between basically a one-on-one. We also have, as you can see here, a piece of voice data. And so voice is fully embedded in our application. Just as you see chat here, as an analyst, I have the ability to expand this voice event. I have the ability to either review the transcript or play the transcript from any point in this voice call.
Michelle Farrell. Hi, Michelle. Sandy transferred me over.
And so you can see where I can just basically go to any point in the call.
Guess when you're
and start playing that voice event. So it gives the analyst full context. I see their chats, I see their voice, and finally I can look at some trades that were deemed to be unusual as well. All the things that make that trade interesting. So this is really the benefit and the value of being able to do things like, let's look at what someone's normal baseline of activity is, and then let's calculate when they deviate from that normal baseline and flag that for an analyst. So this is how we do behavioral analytics. How do we operationalize it? Talked a lot about workflow and efficiencies. And so what we have developed is a dashboard that's configurable. So a front office supervisor or back office person or whomever, compliance analyst, can each configure their own personalized view of the data set. But this is really where they have the ability then to take the results of those behavioral analytics. I showed you the things that our system deemed to be interesting. We then take that and populate a work queue for that analyst and allow the analyst to very quickly drill down and then say, okay, here's a here's an email with an interesting attachment that flags on confidential words. I'm going to take a look at that, and maybe I'm going to go ahead and escalate that to an investigations team. You have the ability to drill down. We see Walter Brantley. He's got some sort of interesting email. And then when we want to do a deep dive investigation, and I can see he's got some sort of conference follow-up email that flagged for a couple of different reasons, I have the ability to do that forensics look by clicking on what we call a show context button. And now what I'm saying is show me everything Walter did on that day. I want to now fill in the blanks, and I want to look across all these different types of activities: cell phone data, chat, email, text, trades, voice. See the things that made that data set interesting for Walter on that day, who the folks he communicated with the most were on that day. And then I have the ability to then start to drill down into that data and say, well, let's look at a timeline, and let's actually look at his events and see, okay, looks like we have some voice calls happening around the same time as trades. Let's dig into that. We can now take a look at the trading activity at that point in time, see what made those trades interesting, and then again see, okay, it looks like he also placed a call
on 18, 19, 20, 21.
And let's listen to what he actually said during that call he placed right around the time of that trade. So that's a little bit of the product. Didn't want to go too deep into it. I think the only other thing I would say is that all these analytics, the dashboards, everything's fully configurable. There's no black boxes here, so the clients have the ability to tune the way these analytics are applied, the kinds of risk they want to be able to model and score on. But at a high level, just want to take you a little bit through the product, how we leverage voice, fully integrate it to give you that single pane of glass and a single place from which an analyst can do that deep dive investigation into alerts of interest. Okay. So I think with that, I'll hand it back off to Phil, and then we can go from there.
Right, so I'm going to share my screen again. Sorry, I'm not as slick as Maurizio there.
I've gotten used to Zoom Phil over the last several months.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is talk about the speech analytics piece. And there's really two ways that we work with RedOwl. There's an element of we can provide access to the audio. We can link two ways, so they can pull the audio. We can squirt the audio out. We can also force out the transcription information. So we have the ability to do two-way analytics. So you can do a deep dive drill in our environment, or you can just take the transcriptions and do and metadata associated with the call and do the analytics in context with all the other eComms in the RedOwl solution. Where this really comes to the fore is what we're doing is we're transcribing 100% of calls to make that voice searchable. So we're taking it from unstructured to structured data. Uniquely, we can also take non-Verint voice recordings as well. So within our own solution, we can formulate that data and transcribe it. Now, ideally, you need uncompressed, unmixed data, but we will take what is recorded as mono audio, we'll do some analytics on it, and we'll stereo separate the audio, which you'll see shortly. So we can identify trader and counterparty, or party A, party B. It's a multilingual solution. We've got over 30 languages supplied, but we've also got taxonomies for vertical markets, healthcare, financial services, energy, and various other solutions. So this is really a tried and tested solution that we've been working with since the early 2000s. It's our 5th generation of solution. We have open interfaces, as I've said, which allows us to work both ways with importing data to extract from other voice recording solutions, and we can also export metadata and transcriptions as well as reports. Just to give you a flavour of where we are, we've been working with an energy broker over a number of years now. They were heavily fined for market manipulation some years ago, back in 2012. They have now standardized on Verint solution and are working both in conjunction with the regulator and also to improve their own internal systems so that they have much better performance from their staff members, because they're not seen to people are not seen to be bullied or put in an awkward position. Before the analytics, they had a very small team of 4 people focused on surveillance. And in the 6 months, or in a 6-month period when they were looking at the data, they found no suspicious information, and yet the company was still fined in excess of $200 million for market manipulation. After the analytics solution was installed, they've used some of the capabilities. They've managed to identify suspicious calls and act upon those within weeks of deployment. They're now actually carrying out investigations on a very small number of calls through the categorization feature, which allows them to modify the known world of their environment by building a lexicon. So they're down to a small number of calls, approximately 400 per month. They can also respond much more quickly to the regulator, which was part of the issue that they had originally. They couldn't provide the data. So overall, they're happy with the solution. It's helped them reduce errors, help reduce fraud, hopefully to zero. It's also allowing them to provide evidence back to the regulator and reducing their overall risk and improving their brand image, which was no doubt heavily damaged at the time the fines were issued. So what I'll do now is I'll switch to the demo solution and walk you through that. So Maurizio, if you could confirm you can see the demo when I bring it up. Is that working?
No, I still see the live demonstration slide.
Right, so let me, so it should be now sharing my.
Yep, that's better.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, there are really 2 areas within the analytics solution that I'll focus on now that allow the compliance team, allow regulators to work with the solution. We have, if you like it, the Discover the Trends environment. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the categorized solutions where we've got, we've noticed megawatts, account, Portland. These are lexicons that have been built by the customer over time to show trending use of speech and words and grammar and phraseology. Now, the known world, as we like to call it, is developed over time. So you'll start small. You'll have a lexicon that you want to use, like swaps or energy or trade or buy, whatever those terms might be, you will build those, but they will change over time. On the right-hand side is what we call the unknown world. This is a really interesting area because this will pull back trending words and phrases that are bubbling up in real time, and you can set the time category you want to look at, be it day, week, month, year, and that will show you how the use of these words is changing over time. Just to give you a bit of an idea, there's categorization in terms of color. So in this particular setup, blue is trending downwards, purple is trending up, so there's an increase in the use of taxonomy. And on the left-hand side, similar. So blue is trending down. People are talking about megawatts less, but they're talking about billing more, for example. Now, this demo is based around the Enron investigation from some years ago. So these are all publicly held calls and data. So you can go and look online and find out more information about it. But as you know, Enron was probably the largest bankruptcy of all time some years ago. Right, now if I go and look at an area within this, from a day-to-day basis, I can very quickly select a series of interactions that I want to look at. The screen's loading, and what this has done is just loaded up all interactions for a particular time period. I can go into the search box window and carry out what is effectively a Google type search. So for example, I know that the biggest problem with Enron was they were forcing shutdowns of power plants to drive the market price high. So if I do a search for phraseology of shut near down or shut down, the system will then go and search the transcribed data. Now bear in mind, all of the audio has been transcribed before I do any analytics on this. So I could put any words in that search box and do a review. So I may believe I've stumbled on a new code word, and I could go and put that in the search and then go and pull back any calls with that code word in, or similes, or phrases that contain within 100 words, for example. My quick search there has pulled back a number of interactions. It's identified 20. I'm actually interested in one particular trader within this environment, who I believe has been providing information outside of the organization. I've clicked on the call. It's brought back the video representation of the audio. It's identified within that time frame where the word shutdown was spoken, and I can now very quickly just select play and start listening to the call.
Okay, good, Jim's Rich.
And I do apologize, the audio is quite crackly. It's 20-year-old audio now, so we'll go through it and have a quick listen.
Hey, Rich, this is Bill up at NL. Bill. How you doing, man? Junior or senior? Third. The third. What's happening, Bill, the third? Not much, man. I'm giving you a call. We've got some issues for tomorrow. Okay. You ready for some issues? You've just got out of there, aren't you? I got a couple more hours. I ain't going anywhere. Good. All right, shoot. I've got pen and paper. All right, man. This is going to be a word-of-mouth kind of thing. Okay.
Now, at that point, you've heard the guy say, this is going to be a word-of-mouth kind of thing. Now, when I bring up the entire picture of this, you'll see that I've got the ability to pull down not only the audio display, but also the transcription from that call. Do apologize, it's taking a second to load. My fault, I should have done this earlier. Now on the left-hand side at the bottom, you'll see the transcription window where we have stereo separated the audio into the particular speakers, and we can now see in context who is speaking and who at which particular time.
We need to come down. What's called about power company slowing down? Just calling, hey guys, you know, gonna check you out for coming down for hour 1.
As you go through the call, you can then mark the call for particular analysis. You can add flags to the call, so you notify where exactly within the call you find a particular phraseology or use of a word. But what's really interesting as well, I can return to the interactions and I can start to look at where that trader, where that group of traders or desk are interacting, and start to look at things like context. And what context will do is build a spider graph for me of those users and that phraseology, so I can now start to see in context other areas and other calls which may have the same verbiage within it. So I can then start to build out an investigation that will give me more information about other fraudulent activity related to shutdown. So for example, tonight, switch issues. So those can give me other calls to go and look at where I can do deep dive investigations. And I think really for now that's given us a flavour of where I can go to. Hopefully it will just give you a brief introduction. So if I now switch back to the slide deck. Key points here. We provide a Google-like search, so the fact that we have transcribed all of the audio, you can search for any word and phrase. You don't have to re-transcribe the audio to do the search. You can do the slice and dice of data as it is. It's already been done. You have the known world and the unknown world within the category and if you like, the top level of the solution to be able to start understanding how things are changing over time. Is my known world flagging behind the unknown world? Am I starting to see new code words, new use of grammar and phraseology popping up? I can feed data out to third parties, which is the key point of this, because then you have the full trade surveillance capability. But overall, it's improving efficiency and it's reducing cost to the business, so they're not having to hire the hundreds, if not thousands, of compliance analysts to do that individual call analysis. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Great, thank you, Mauricio and Phil. We appreciate that. I have a couple questions here. The first question I think will be for you, Phil. One panelist is one attendee is asking, what challenges have you encountered when converting audio into text, in particular when reviewing access? Okay, so there's really 2 or 3 things to take into account. There's obviously the language capability. The way the solution works in terms of language, we scale horizontally. So we would run, let's say, US English and French on 2 separate transcriptions, transcription servers, but they would both return the data into a single consolidated view. We then have the capability to build taxonomies for vertical industries, such as financial compliance, but we also have the capability to do what we call phonetic boosting. So examples where you may find a very strong accent, we would have to tune the solution for that accent. Unfortunately, at that point, you do have to do the transcription again once you've phonetically boosted, but we do have the capability to take that into account. And there are certain words like, you caught me out now, I can't think of a word where there is a simile, and you would have to tune the system to remove similes so that you can identify them correctly. And looking at some of the transcriptions, even on this system, you would see where the phonetic boosting would need to be improved to make it much more accurate. But like I say, there's really 2 or 3 things that we end up doing. Language and phonetic boosting are probably the 2 most common things. And that adds to the startup time, but generally we're transcribing in a matter of days of installing, and phonetic boosting is a process that would be carried out over maybe a 6-week to 3-month period to improve it for a customer. It's never ending though. You will always be tuning the system to a degree. Thank you very much. Another question is probably, this is for Mauricio. Can you talk a little bit more about how RedOwl increases the efficiency of daily compliance reviews?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. The dashboard that I showed during the demo is really where that starts. And actually, let me just, as I talk about this, so you should all see the dashboard. So just a couple of quick points to make here. The first is that this is my work queue, and I log in, and this is customized to me as what the particular type of role I have. And so the first point is that when I set a review status that maybe, and this is configurable, but you might escalate to a compliance officer, for instance, and then when you do that, it will automatically populate that other person's dashboard. So the next time they log in, they have that in there. So by setting review statuses, configurable dashboards, we have the ability to basically move this data around from dashboard to dashboard so that it goes through a really sort of streamlined process. Second thing I want to point out here is that you have the ability within the app to annotate these events, right? I can take any event, I can create a note on that event, and the note can be public. And if I reference another user, it'll populate their dashboard as well. So I have a notification that I received that tells me a certain event is unusual. I can then dig into that event and actually see what it is. You know, I see my note and I see what it is that makes that event unusual. So we've got a lot of capabilities built into the dashboard that allow for the automatic routing of events based on review status and the ability to collaborate across a team using this annotation, all of which is fully audited, captured, and then and stored. So if you ever need to basically see who did what, you have that ability.
Great, thank you, Maurizio. Another question here. I'm not sure who's better equipped to answer this one, but the question is, how long after a call is the transcription available for analysis and investigation?
If I pick up the first part of that, what we need to do is scale the solution to suit the need of the customer. But in general, within 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the solution and the volume of calls and the average handle time, the more short calls there are, the more processing power it takes to do this. But it's not something that's taking days, it's hours typically.
And once that process has been completed, from a RedOwl perspective, we have the ability to ingest data different ways. So we have email streaming in near real time. We'll receive voice data as it comes, and at that point, within minutes, it's available in the dashboard and available for review.
Thank you, gentlemen. One other question here. How are you able to run searches and voice analytics against mobile phone conversations? Does this require permission from each relevant network provider?
So there's really a couple of answers to this. Yes, obviously from a wiretapping perspective, if the business takes into its usual terms and conditions that they will monitor any comms, be it voice, email, chat, whatever it will be, there's no reason why they can't access those calls. There are certain geographies in the world, take Germany, for example, that's a typical one. It's much more difficult there because the individual user has the ability to opt out because of data privacy rules. So in some cases, it comes down to terms and conditions of employment. Sometimes it comes down to local regulatory requirements. There isn't a simple answer, but declaring that you will record calls on a mobile provisioned by the business for business-only calls should not be an issue. The legal teams and the compliance teams will probably want to review that statement, but it shouldn't be an issue in general.
Great. All right, so I have two more questions and then we will close things down. Question here is, if people switch between languages, can the analytics tool easily identify those switches? And how many languages can be currently catered for? I think what he's trying to say is, how many languages can you cover?
Yeah, so there is some customization work. We can cope easily with 2 languages and merge them into a single transcription. Where someone is deliberately trying to confuse the system, by, you know, and I'm not saying that any particular, I've worked a lot with Europeans, and Belgians and Dutch can quite often speak 4 languages fluently. Where someone can switch languages on an individual word basis, it becomes more difficult. However, we would still transcribe to what we believe the nearest word is. So you will get, on the transcription, you may have seen some words were bold and some were grayed out. We scale words on a scale of 1 to 1,000, but we display them in a 5-segment gray scale. So where a word is grayed, we're not certain what it was, but at least it will give you an indication that that someone is trying to be cute in terms of handling multiple languages, and you'd probably, you know, go and listen to those calls specifically. But yeah, I don't have an answer for how many we can handle at once. I will certainly look into it.
All right, one other question here. Can the system capture market news feeds, and can existing lexicons be used to cross-reference against calls and electronic forms of communications?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we do have some customers that are feeding us market news data. And so, for instance, when I go to this Explore page, you'll see that in this demo environment, we have some market news data. So where this really comes into play is when you start to overlay that on a timeline against voice communications, trading data, and you can see where, say, a piece of market news hits that might represent some kind of market moving event, and then we see a series of calls and trades that follow that. So that is certainly something that we have the ability to do.
Great, thank you, Maurizio. Last question, Phil. This is definitely for you. What is your prediction on Brexit?
Right, this is going to be a close one. I am sweating this a bit. I believe it's going to be a 49-51, 48-52 type of vote. I think we're going to remain in, but they're going to make us sweat until about 7 o'clock on Friday morning to when the vote is complete. But I do hope we're still in.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. You will get a copy of the presentation. We will send that off to you. In addition, we'd like to invite you all to take a longer demo or a further briefing with both RedOwl and Verint to understand what we do in terms of regulatory surveillance and voice. We'll be happy to go into a much deeper dive. We had a great turnout, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time out of your day, and we hope it's very useful. On that note, thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.